I think we're going to go into national security because there's this illusion or this presumption that's allowing national security to take precedence over state security. And this refers, of course, to the citizen or human being as a state or of a state, and is defined in their own statutes. So I'll just start. Now, Texas this week, a Bow National Guard commander charged in Texas sex trafficking case. Everybody listens to me knows that Texas is a hub, and one of the major profiteers is Rick Perry himself, traded as the Department of Health and Human Services, as well as the General Counsel on Dun & Bradstreet. All of these things are sewn up and tied up, buttoned up in adherence to national security. This is from the ConcordMonitor.com. A New Hampshire National Guard commander who led an infantry unit in Iraq and co-founded the state's first hurling team, the Barley House Wolves, has been arrested and charged with child sex trafficking. Lieutenant Colonel Raymond Vallis, 41 of Bow, was arrested last week in New York on federal indictment out of San Antonio, Texas. The charge stems from an unspecified incident last August when Vallis was in San Antonio after a 4-month humanitarian mission he oversaw in El Salvador. The indictment does not specify what role Vallis allegedly played in the trafficking. 2 other men, both of San Antonio, have been equally charged in the case. Vallis' attorney, John Convery of San Antonio, said it had been reported locally that Vallis had sex with an underage prostitute. Now that's an oxymoron in itself, isn't it? Convery said he had no further information about the allegations. He has yet to meet with Vallis, who is being held in New York pending transfer to Texas. Quote, I think based on the allegation, the question is not whether she was underage, Convery said. The question is what he knew. In an order last week denying bail, a judge in Syracuse wrote that Vallis had proffered that he did not know the child was a minor. Federal minimum prison sentence for sex trafficking a child is 10 years, 15 if the child is under 14. Quote, if this were a simple case of prostitution, it would be a county misdemeanor, Convery said. Vallis has been studying at the Institute for National Security and Counterterrorism based at Syracuse University in New York, said Lieutenant Colonel Greg Halshorn, a spokesman for the New Hampshire National Guard. He had been scheduled to return to New Hampshire a week after his arrest. Halshorn said Vallis' security clearance has been revoked pending the outcome of the case. Vallis was commissioned in 1995 through the Reserve Officers Training Corps at the University of New Hampshire. He deployed in 2004 with the New Hampshire National Guard C Company, 3rd Battalion of the 172nd Infantry, based in Manchester. The unit returned in 2005, after which Vallis established the Wolves in an effort to help his men adjust to life post-combat. The team, sponsored by the Barley House in Concord, still exists. Today it includes members of local law enforcement, fire department, as well as civilians. Last year, Vallis led about 40 men on a 4-month humanitarian mission to western El Salvador, during which they built schools and performed other construction and repair projects. Halshorn said the operation was overseen by U.S. Army South, which is headquartered in San Antonio. Convery said Vallis has a wife and children who live in New Hampshire. He also said his phone had been ringing off the hook with support from Vallis' friends and fellow infantrymen. So why don't we go to the National Security Study Memo of 200 by Henry Kissinger to the National Security Council, 1974. Dr. Henry Kissinger proposed in his memorandum to the NSC that depopulation should be the highest priority of U.S. foreign policy towards the Third World. He quoted reasons of national security because the, quote, U.S. economy will require large and increasing amounts of minerals from abroad, especially from less developed countries. Whenever a lessening of population can increase the prospects for such stability, population policy becomes relevant to resources supplies, and to the economic interests of the United States Incorporated. The targeting agency for the operation is the National Security Council's ad hoc group on population policy. Its policy planning group in the United States State Department's Office of Population Affairs was established in 1975 by Dr. Henry Kissinger. The Office of Population Affairs is the Health and Human Services Department of this government entity. Part of national security, of course, is capacity building. Capacity building means doing whatever is necessary to make a human being produce. Traumatization, shock doctrine implication makes children produce effectively for a corporate body. Under 28 U.S.C. subsection 1603, the definition of foreign state, A. Foreign state except as used in section 1608 of this title includes a political subdivision of a foreign state or an agency or instrumentality of a foreign state as defined in subsection B. B. An agency or instrumentality of a foreign state means any entity, one, which is a separate legal person, corporate or otherwise, and two, which is an organ of a foreign state or political subdivision thereof, or a majority of whose shares or other ownership interests is owned by a foreign state or political subdivision thereof, and three, which is neither a citizen of a state of the United States as defined in section 1332 C and E of this title, nor created under the laws of any third country. C. The United States includes all territory and waters, continental or insular, subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. D. Commercial activity means either a regular course of commercial conduct or a particular commercial transaction or act. The commercial character of an activity shall be determined by reference to the nature of its course of conduct or particular transaction or act rather than by reference to its purpose. A commercial activity carried on in the United States by a foreign state means commercial activity carried on by any such state and having substantial contact with the United States Incorporated. So the 1947 National Security Act, July 26, 1947. Public Law 253, 80th Congress, Chapter 343, First Session, Section 758. An act to promote the national security by providing for a Secretary of Defense for a national military establishment, for a Department of the Army, a Department of the Navy, and a Department of the Air Force, and for the coordination of the activities of the national military establishment and other departments and agencies of the government concerned with national security. Be it enacted by the Senate and the House of Representatives of the United States of America and Congress assembled. Short title. This act may be cited as the National Security Act of 1947. Table of Contents, Declaration of Policy. Title I, Coordination for National Security. Section 101, National Security Council. Section 102, Central Intelligence Agency. Section 103, National Security Resources Board. Title II, the National Military Establishment. Section 201, National Military Establishment, Secretary of Defense, Military Assistance to the Secretary, Civilian Personnel, Departments of the Army, Department of the Navy, Department of the Air Force, United States Air Force, effective date of transfers, War Council, Joint Chiefs of Staff, Joint Staff Munitions Board, Research and Development Board. Title III, Miscellaneous Establishment of Compensation of Secretaries, Undersecretaries, and Assistant Secretaries, Advisory Committees and Personnel, Status of Transferred Civilian Personnel, Saving Provisions, Transfer of Funds, Authorization of Appropriations, Definition, Separability, Effective Date, Succession to the Presidency. Declaration of Policy, Section 2. In enacting this legislation, it is the intent of Congress to provide a comprehensive program for the future security of the United States Incorporated, to provide for the establishment of integrated policies and procedures for the departments, agencies, and functions of the government relating to the national security, to provide 3 military departments for the operation and administration of the Army, the Navy, including naval aviation, and the United States Marine Corps and the Air Force with their assigned combat and service components, to provide for their authoritative coordination and unified direction under civilian control, but not to merge them, to provide for the effective strategic direction of the armed forces and for the operation under unified control of and for their integration into an effective team of land, naval, and air forces. Title I, Coordination for National Security, National Security Council, Section 101. There is hereby established a council to be known as the National Security Council, hereinafter in this section referred to as the Council. The President of the United States Incorporated shall preside over meetings of the Council, provided that in his absence he may designate a member of the Council to preside in his place. The function of the Council shall be to advise the President with respect to the integration of domestic, foreign, and military policies related to the national security so as to enable the military services and other departments and agencies of the government to cooperate more effectively in matters involving the national security. The Council shall be comprised of the President, the Secretary of State, the Secretary of Defense, and appointed under Section 202, the Secretary of Army, referred to in Section 205, the Secretary of the Navy, the Secretary of the Air Force, appointed under Section 207, the Chairman of the National Security Resources Board, appointed under Section 103, and such of the following named officers as the President may designate from time to time: the Secretaries of the Executive Departments, the Chairman of the Munitions Board, appointed under Section 213, and the Chairman of the Research and Development Board, appointed under Section 214. But no such additional member shall be designated until the advice and consent of the Senate has been given to this appointment to the office, the holding of which authorizes his designation as a member of the Council. In addition to performing such other function as the President may direct for the purpose of more effectively coordinating the policies and functions of the departments and agencies of the government relating to the national security, it shall, subject to the direction of the President, be the duty of the Council to 1. Assess and appraise the objectives, commitments, and risks of the United States Incorporated in relation to our actual and potential military power in the interests of national security for the purpose of making recommendations to the President in connection therewith, and 2, to consider policies on matters of common interest to the departments and agencies of the government concerned with the national security, and to make recommendations to the President in connection therewith. I'll go over to Boston College Environmental Affairs Law Review, Formulating Population Policy, a case study of the United States. This was put out January 1st, 1974, by Rebecca J. Cook. The objectives of this article are: 1, to describe how population policies are perceived, formulated, and implemented in the United States, and 2, to analyze how and why the definition of demographic trends by 10 state commissions have a profound effect on how policies are developed and evaluated. Some of the demographic components of policy will be outlined for the lawmaker, and some of the legal components of policy will be described for the demographer. For the purpose of explanation, 4 analytical population policy models are developed. 1, the family planning model. 2, the motivation model. 3, the population distribution model. And 4, the per capita consumption model. There is no one correct policy model, but rather many policy models have and can be developed based on different social, economic, political, and environmental conditions of the state. The article's principal analytical utility lies in its challenge to state officials to develop their policy model based on the unique conditions and goals of their state. A legal system model outlines the many facets of policymaking that should be taken into consideration in helping to determine which kinds of legal change should be used in implementing policy. Since the demographic effectiveness of legal change on a population policy is uncertain or unknown, subjecting alternative pieces of legislation, the, quote, inputs, to test hypothesizing a desired, quote, output might help to formulate and choose more effective policies. For example, compare the effectiveness of 2 pieces of legislation, one requiring the teaching of population education and the other instituting programs to raise the status of women. Determine which legal change would be functional in implementing a policy population reduction. This is referring to Hearts and Minds. The answer depends on how many conditions within a state, some of which could be determined by projecting the probable feedback. The effectiveness of any institution in implementing policies determine in part how well policies are defined and how well institutions are structured. It could be a relatively straightforward matter to establish effective statutory policy. Most states have developed adequate statutory family planning policies and have created the agencies necessary to implement the family planning objectives. However, they are just beginning to articulate and develop three subsequent models: the motivation model, the distribution model, and the per capita consumption model, to enable them to adequately develop institutions capable of implementing these models' objectives. Once a policy is selected, the immediate institutional problem becomes the determination of the indicators needed to measure the policy's effectiveness. The search for criteria raised such issues as: 1. Is the two-child family an adequate policy indicator to measure the effectiveness of stabilization policy? 2. Do the given indicators ignore the other dimensions of the problem? And 3. How are institutions best designed to evaluate policy? This article asks more questions about policy making than is answered. It is hoped, however, that the questions will be helpful in determining how and at what points the legal process can be used in formulating and implementing population policies. Section 1. Population Policy Formulation. Population policy is a direct and indirect result of legislative, judicial, executive, and administrative actions affecting many demographic components. These components include: 1. The size of population; 2. The rate of increase or decrease of either birth, death, or growth rates; 3. The distribution of a populace within an area, including both internal and international migration; 4. The age and racial composition of a population; and 5. The qualitative composition of a population in terms of inter alia education, per capita consumption, and per capita income. Population policies fall along a wide spectrum. On one end, the antinatalists assert the advantage of lower growth rates; at the other, and the pronatalists assert the benefits of an increased population. Between these extremes are variations with anticipated and unanticipated consequences. There are 4 behavioral elements of population change: political, economic, social, and environmental. The effects of population change can be diagrammed by comparing these behavioral elements on a vertical axis and their determinants, meaning size, rate, distribution, and composition, on a horizontal axis. A. State population commissions. In formulating population policy, states are faced with the choice of whether to allow existing trends to shape the future size, rates of growth, composition, distribution, and per capita consumption of its population, or whether to alter these trends by adopting population policies. Either alternative, in effect, constitutes population policy. 12 states, through special state commissions, have issued reports recommending explicit policies either to stabilize growth rates or to locate the populace in better balance relative to resources and services. These policy recommendations agree with the following conclusions of the report of the Commission on Population Growth and the American Future, which was written in 1974, which states, quote, "The Commission believes that the gradual stabilization of population, bringing births into balance with deaths, will contribute significantly to the nation's ability to solve its problems. Although such problems would not be solved by population stabilization alone, it would, however, enable our society to shift its focus increasingly from quantity to quality." These commissions have been either special population commissions, subcommittees, or state environmental commissions, or commissions on land use and population distribution. Although the commissions have been appointed by the governors and or the state legislators, The reports have been primarily the result of research by citizens and state officials interested in population matters. The Commission members represent a broad spectrum of racial, economic, religious, and academic backgrounds. The reports are based in large part upon citizen testimony, academic studies performed at state universities, and statements of state and local officials. As a result, these reports are useful in educating the general public about state population policies. B. Demographic trends. Recognizing that demographic trends form the basis of policy, the California, Colorado, Hawaii, Massachusetts, and Michigan reports investigate the recent history and the projected future of population growth and change. Each report distinguishes between 1. Growth due to natural increase, 2. Growth due to migration, and 3. Differential growth rates between the urban and rural areas. For example, Colorado's population grew by 26% in the 60s. However, 49% of this increase was due to net migration. California expanded by 28% in the 60s with a present population of about 20 million. 51% of that increase is attributable to net migration, but this factor has begun to diminish relatively and absolutely in relation to natural growth. California and Colorado were used as examples not only because they were among the fastest growing states in population, but because their population problems should be solved by 2 distinct policies, one aimed at immigration policies and the other aimed at the birth rate. Now, if a human population birth rate is a problem for national security, they are talking about depopulation policy. This is not something that's hidden or in the background or away from you or in a different quote country. A lot of you live in California. A lot of you live in Colorado. A lot of you live in Michigan. A lot of you live anywhere else. And this is in regards to population policy for national security, which is international. I urge everybody to read the National Security Council's Study Memorandum 200. April 24th, 1974. This went out to the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of Agriculture. You'll find that you, the human being, are considered an animal under 7 USC, which is agriculture. The Director of Central Intelligence, that current director is Brennan. The Deputy Secretary of State, which is the Clearinghouse Administrator, Agency for International Development. And the subject is implication of worldwide population growth for United States Incorporated security and overseas interests. Starts out, the President has directed a study of the impact of world population growth on United States Incorporated security and overseas interests. The study should look forward at least until the year 2000 and use several alternative reasonable projections of population growth. In terms of each projection, the study should assess the corresponding pace of development, especially in poor countries, the demand for United States Incorporated exports, especially of food, and the trade problems the United States Incorporated may face rising from competition for resources, and the likelihood that population growth or imbalance will produce disruptive foreign policies and international instability. The study should focus on the international political and economic implications of population growth rather than its ecological, sociological, or other aspects. The study should focus on the international political and economic implications of population growth rather than its ecological, sociological, or other aspects. The study would then offer possible courses of action for the United States Incorporated in dealing with population matters abroad, particularly in developing countries, with special attention to these questions. What, if any, new initiatives by the United States Incorporated are needed to focus international attention on the population problem? Can technological innovations or development reduce growth or ameliorate its effects? Could the United States Incorporated improve its assistance in the population field, and if so, in what form and through which agencies? Bilateral, multilateral, or private? The study should take into account the President's concern that the population policy is a human concern intimately relative to the dignity of the individual and to the objective of the United States Incorporated is to work closely with others rather than seek to impose our views on others. They don't have to impose anything. They use the war tactic of winning hearts and minds. The President has directed that the study be accomplished by the National Security Council Under-Secretaries Committee. The Chairman, Under-Secretaries Committee, is requested to forward the study together with the committee's action recommendations no later than May 29, 1974, for consideration by the President. This is what facilitated the Office of Population Affairs, otherwise known as the Department of Health and Human Services. At the date on this writing, the president was Richard Nixon. From LikeTheDew.com, A Short History of Human Husbandry. Once upon a time, when the continent was sparsely populated, the indigenous peoples, having been largely killed off by introduction of pestilent disease, and natural resources seemed so abundant they would never be used up, public bodies called corporations were organized mainly to distribute the resources to the favored or privileged populace via an assortment of rights: watcher rights, grazing rights, hunting rights, logging rights, mining rights, trading rights, building rights, fishing rights, etc., parental rights, child rights. Some of these rights promote the practice of what we call animal husbandry. The advent of what we call human, civil, and consumer rights into the arena represented a significant change, perhaps facilitated by the fact that the distribution of material assets from the public treasury was depleting those assets, some to the point of disappearance. Beaver, salmon, brook trout came to mind. In any case, the refocus on people and the rights of the natural person constituted a significant revolution, and apparently for some people provided a hint that, like other natural resources, humans were available to be exploited. All that's necessary is to persuade them to consent, and that can be accomplished quite simply by making the resources necessary to sustain their living increasingly scarce. That is, when there is no free lunch, humans can perforce be made to work, i.e., to subordinate themselves to those persons to whom other public assets and resources had been redistributed as private property. Thus was born human husbandry, exemplars of which we can see in the corrections industry, medical technology industry, home and national security industry, elder care, and higher education. The elementary education is also a target of exploitation to be expected. If natural resources aren't available to be consumed, they're to be milked, and children are definitely a natural resource and fungible to boot. Materialism isn't necessarily about accumulating material resources and wealth. Materialism can also be evidenced by the exploitation of man by his fellow man, as if there were no difference between man and other organic and inorganic matter. Respect for life needn't enter into the consideration. Exploiting man in the name of religion, as Betsy DeVos and her associates in the American Federation for Children propose to do, is not new either. In the name of the nation and the dollar and the rule of law is not very different from the traditional trinity if one's fellow man exists to be ruled, not served. Much depends on one's preconceived notions. For further reading, you can find that at LikeTheDew.com. Now, going back to this predator that was nailed for child sex trafficking in Texas, he's actually in adherence to national security policy. They didn't charge him with espionage. They didn't charge his handlers with espionage. However, espionage is defined under 18 U.S.C. subsection 794, gathering or delivering defense information to aid a foreign government. A. Whoever with intent or reason to believe that it is to be used to the injury of the United States or to the advantage of a foreign nation communicates, delivers or transmits or attempts to communicate, deliver, or transmit to any foreign government or to any faction or party or military or naval force within a foreign country, whether recognized or unrecognized by the United States Incorporated, or to any representative, officer, agent, employee, subject, or citizen thereof, either directly or indirectly, any documentation, writing, code book, signal book, sketch, photograph, photographic negative, blueprint, plan, model, no instrument, appliance, or information relating to national defense shall be punished by death or by imprisonment for any term of years or for life, except for that the sentence of death shall not be imposed unless the injury, or if there is no injury, the court further finds that the offense resulted in the identification of a foreign power, as defined in Section 10A of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act of 78, of an individual acting as an agent of the United States, and consequently in the death of that individual or directly concerned nuclear weaponry, military spacecraft or satellites, early warning system, or other means of defense or retaliation against large-scale attack, war plans, communications intelligence, or cryptographic information, or any other major weapon system or major element of defense strategy. Yes, it's a mouthful. However, this is a defense strategy. When they're preying on your kids, raping and molesting your children in adherence to national security to make the child more productive later, enter them into the court process, trick them out by an attorney in a black dress, prosecuting attorneys, and using their body to the utmost is the action of national security. For further information on national security, I urge everybody to go to avalon.law.yale.edu/17th century Westphal.asp, the Treaty of Westphalia, peace treaty between the Holy Roman Empire and the King of France and their respective allies, 1648. The very last line, very last sentence. In the name of the one and the other, bench M. Mark Ota of Strasbourg, M. John James Wolfe of Ratisbon, M. David Gloxinus of Lubeck, and M. Louis Christopher Kress of Crescentine, all syndic, senators, councilors, and advocates of the Republic of Nuremberg, who with their proper heads of seals have signed and sealed this present treaty of peace, and with said deputies of the several orders have engaged to procure the ratifications of their superiors in the prefixed times, and in the manner it has been convened, leaving the liberty to the other plenipotentiaries of states to sign it, if they think it convenient, and send for ratifications of their superiors. And that on condition that by the subscription of the aforesaid ambassadors and deputies, all and every one of the other states who shall abstain from signing and ratifying the present treaty shall be no less obliged to maintain and observe what is contained in this present treaty of pacification than if they had subscribed and ratified it, and no protestation or contradiction of the Council of Direction in the Roman Empire shall be valid or received in respect to the subscription and said deputies have made. Done, passed, and concluded at Munster and Westphalia, the 24th day of October, 1648. From NBCNews.com, Casey Kasem's wife releases disturbing audio of Icon. This is deplorable. Okay, I've been a wife. I am, for all intents and purposes, always a wife. My husband marries me, trusting me. Now, there is a court interceding in Casey Kasem's marital relationship as to his care and comfort during his end stages of life. This court is child trafficking. This court is human trafficking, an adult in need. If you continue to subscribe, if you continue to patronize this thing, this is your end of life. You will be institutionalized, mocked, embarrassed, put through the media, run through the ringer, and everything else that comes along with national security. Now, this is one of our beloved, TV and radio icons. I mean, he was the voice of Shaggy and Scooby-Doo. And now that he needs his wife the most, the court has come in, at the behest of his psychopathic children, to remove her from the ability to protect him for their interests. They are concerned about the money. The court is concerned about his money. The attorneys are getting at his money, using him while he needs human protection the most to facilitate national security and agenda. Enough is enough.